Snow fell like ash from a broken sky, blanketing the Ardennes forest in a silent, suffocating white. The wind cut through the trees, bending their skeletal branches under the weight of frost, and every step Emily Harper took toward her truck felt like walking through a river of needles. The road was invisible beneath layers of ice and powder, a perilous artery leading straight into chaos. Emily Harper, 30 years old, was tall and lean, with sharp blue eyes that reflected both determination and fatigue. Her ash-blonde hair, usually pulled into a tight braid, was now streaked with snow and plastered to her forehead. She had the hands of a mechanic, calloused and steady, capable of coaxing life from engines that others would consider dead. Her uniform hung heavy over her frame, insulated but wet from the relentless storm. She tightened her scarf, feeling the sting of frozen wind on her neck, and exhaled slowly, letting her breath cloud and vanish into the white. Today, her mission was straightforward, or at least it should have been. Deliver high-octane gasoline to a Sherman tank unit near Stavolo, a town already teetering on the edge of the German advance. The fuel was critical. Without it, the tanks would be frozen statues, the guns silent, and countless soldiers would be stranded in the snow with no hope of survival. But the Ardennes was unforgiving. Every mile was a gamble, every turn a potential trap. Emily approached her canvas-covered truck, its olive-drab paint dulled by frost. The vehicle was a standard 2.5-ton military transport, robust but thirsty, guzzling gasoline like a battleship. She ran her gloved fingers along the cold metal, feeling the vibrations still lingering from the engine's last start. Despite her skill and experience driving through France and Belgium since D-Day, a chill ran down her spine. There was something different about this storm. The forest seemed alive, pressing in, whispering threats in a language she could almost understand. As she climbed into the cab, her mind wandered to the faces she had seen along the way. Villagers huddled behind shattered walls, eyes wide with fear. Children whose laughter had long been stolen by war. Soldiers, frozen and exhausted, clinging to guns instead of sleep. Emily had learned early in the campaign that courage was not measured in medals or victories, but in the simple act of continuing, of showing up, of turning the key in a storm when every instinct screamed to run. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening, as she glanced at the frost-covered map taped to the dashboard. The route had been outlined clearly by the transport corps, but maps were only useful when the world made sense, and Ardennes had abandoned all sense. Roads twisted unpredictably, landmarks disappeared under snowdrifts, and radio silence prevented any communication with her unit. She was alone, fully responsible for the lifeline of an entire armored division. The weight of that responsibility pressed down like the snow on her shoulders. Emily started the engine, the diesel rumbling to life like a reluctant beast. She adjusted her mirrors, checked the gauges, and whispered to herself, "Come on, girl, just another mile." Her voice was steadier than she felt. The storm outside rattled the canvas roof, a constant percussion that mirrored her anxiety. Every shadow between the trees could be a German scout, every flicker of movement a trap. She had no illusions about the dangers ahead. Ardennes had claimed the lives of men less skilled, less cautious, less stubborn. Half a mile into the forest, she passed a burned-out jeep, twisted metal rising from the snow like a skeletal warning. Emily's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Her mind wandered to her brother, Thomas, who had been captured in Normandy months ago. The memory was a sharpened knife in her chest. His letters, filled with quiet hope, had taught her that fear could not dictate action. She could not stop. She would not stop. Lives depended on her. Visibility dropped as the storm intensified. Snowflakes whipped across her windshield, forcing her to lean forward and squint through the dim beam of her headlights. The road, if it could be called that, narrowed to a single track, bordered by the dense, dark forest. Every mile felt like an hour. Her thoughts turned inward. Could she make it through? What if she ran out of fuel herself? What if she drove straight into an enemy patrol? The scenarios spiraled in her mind, each worse than the last. But beneath the fear, a quiet determination grew. She was not a soldier on the front lines. She was a lifeline, and lifelines did not surrender. Halfway to her destination, a howl cut through the wind. A dog, lost or feral, chasing shadows in the storm. Emily's eyes darted to the roadside, and for a fleeting moment she imagined the animal as a companion, a fellow survivor in the frozen wilderness. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, swallowed by snow and night. She shook her head, forcing herself back to the road, back to the mission. The forest seemed endless, a maze of white and black that tested her patience and her nerves. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had no meaning here. Her mind began cataloging every detail, searching for patterns in the chaos. Twisted trunks, frozen streams, patches of earth where snow had melted and refrozen. Each clue, however minor, became a lifeline. Her training, her instincts, and her stubbornness guided her as much as the limited map. She realized that survival depended not only on skill, but on her ability to accept uncertainty, to act without complete information. Finally, as night deepened, she glimpsed a faint glimmer of light through the trees. Relief and suspicion warred within her. Could it be a German patrol, or a friendly outpost, holding on against impossible odds? Emily slowed the truck to a crawl, heart pounding. She fumbled for her sidearm, a standard-issue Colt, feeling the familiar weight in her hands. The metal was cold, but steady. She whispered a quiet prayer, for luck, for courage, and for Thomas, whose memory drove her forward. The light shifted. A figure emerged, calling in a voice muffled by the storm. "Halt! Password!" Emily's breath hitched, icy fog spilling from her lips. She answered slowly, deliberately, "Pennsylvania." The pause that followed felt like eternity. Then recognition, a nod, and the figure waved her through. Relief threatened to overwhelm her, but she held it in check, focusing on the fuel drums behind her canvas cover. She had reached a waypoint, a lifeline, a small bastion of hope. Pulling forward, she glanced at the snow-choked road ahead, knowing that the hardest part was still to come. The Ardennes would not yield, the storm would not relent, and the enemy was unseen but omnipresent. Emily tightened her grip on the wheel, feeling the vibrations of the engine pulse through her body, a reminder that she could make a difference, that she must. Every mile brought her closer to lives she might save, to tanks that could fire again, to soldiers who had waited too long for hope. As the truck groaned into the next stretch of forest, Emily allowed herself one small, private thought. She was not a hero, not yet. She was simply a driver, a woman with frostbitten hands and a stubborn refusal to quit. And sometimes, she realized, that was enough to change everything. The wind howled behind her, the forest stretched endlessly ahead, and Emily Harper drove on, carrying gasoline, courage, and the fragile flame of hope into the heart of the Ardennes. Tom tat bang tieng viet. Emily Harper. Nutai shekwan nhu mai nhan hiem vu vanchuyen shang kao okten jen jon visatang gan stavelot trongbon tuyet dudoe. Tran jongji ko kam han su ko jok su hon luan qua chien truong ardel. Veuap luk nang ne quan hiem vu song kon. Ko 5 watt queen hung kong juong ngui hiem, jem toe, va ka nang gabe jich, bang ki nang, kien tri ve quet dam, Emily tim de motrem kiem soat, miang, gubin tin vi tiep duken hiem vu, hoi ju chu quok han trin jin men. The storm showed no mercy, snow piling in drifts across the narrow Ardennes roads, turning every mile into a gauntlet. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, and the forest pressed in like a living entity. Shadowy branches scraping against the truck's canvas roof. Emily Harper squinted through the swirling white, hands gripping the wheel until her knuckles burned. Every muscle in her body was taut, every sense heightened, as she followed the path her map no longer recognized. Emily had been driving for hours, her mind oscillating between focus and fatigue. She knew the terrain well enough to navigate under ordinary circumstances, but the altered road signs had thrown her off completely. She should have reached a minor bridge 30 minutes ago, but instead, the forest had become a maze of identical white and black, the snow swallowing familiar markers. Her stomach twisted with the realization she was lost. Emily Harper, still the lean, tall figure with ash-blonde hair plastered to her forehead, felt an unfamiliar tremor of panic. She inhaled, tasting the sharp sting of icy air, and forced her thoughts back to procedure. Fear had no place here. One wrong decision could put the Sherman units at risk, but also her own life. She scanned the tree line, noting subtle deviations in the snow patterns, signs of recent passage. anything that could guide her. Every instinct, honed over years of mechanical work and wartime driving, was screaming at her to slow down and observe. Then came the first sign of the chaos she had been hoping to avoid. A burned-out German half-track, its tracks frozen mid-turn, lay abandoned at the roadside. Metal protruded like broken teeth from the snow, twisted and blackened. Emily felt a jolt of adrenaline. Someone had been here recently, and not peacefully. She checked the fuel gauge, still full, but the engine guzzled rapidly in such weather. There was no margin for error. As she navigated past the wreck, a cold wind forced her eyes shut for a moment. In that brief darkness behind her eyelids, she envisioned the consequences of failure. Entire units immobilized, soldiers stranded in snowdrifts, and the creeping advance of German armored columns exploiting her delay. She shook her head, dismissing the morbid images. Concentration was survival, fear was optional. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost meaning. Into this uncharted territory, she reached a fork in the road, 3 paths splitting into the unknown. A faint flicker of red paint caught her eye, partially obscured by frost on a tree trunk. An American star, weathered but unmistakable. Relief surged, followed immediately by doubt. How old was this marker? Could it be a trap? Emily's pulse accelerated. Her training taught her that enemy forces often dressed as Americans, switched signs, and set ambushes for isolated convoys. Every step forward was a gamble. The middle path seemed the safest, the ground compacted by recent passage. She turned the wheel. Cautiously, the truck groaning in protest. Her mind flicked to memories of Thomas, her brother, and the letters he wrote from captivity. He had always emphasized observation over impulse, patience over recklessness. Emily drew on those lessons now, letting the rhythm of the truck and the road guide her decisions. Every rut, every bend, every subtle dip in the terrain was scrutinized. About half an hour later, the unmistakable sound of an engine, diesel, heavy, deliberate, echoed through the trees. Emily froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She knew the sound could belong to a German patrol, searching blindly for supply trucks, or a friendly convoy lost as she was. Her heart thudded in her chest, threatening to drown out thought. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her sidearm, the Colt cold and comforting in her glove. She kept the engine running quietly, rolling forward in a controlled crawl. The forest swallowed the sound, leaving only the hiss of wind and the crunch of tires over hardened snow. A glimmer of movement caught her eye. A young soldier, barely visible through the snowstorm, waving her down from a partially destroyed roadside checkpoint. His uniform was muddied and torn, helmet dented, face streaked with frost and grime. Sergeant David Monroe, 29, angular features, dark hair plastered to his scalp, eyes sharp and calculating. His reputation for cautious pragmatism preceded him. He had survived Ardennes by reading the terrain and trusting his instincts more than orders. Emily exhaled, relief almost overwhelming her, but she maintained composure. "Emily Harper?" Monroe's voice was steady, though tinged with surprise. "You're off route. Thought your convoy would have cleared here hours ago." His gaze swept the forest around them, taking in the burned-out vehicles and ghostly silence. He was tall, wiry, with shoulders squared from years of labor and service, his voice carrying a calm authority. He held a clipboard with the rough efficiency of someone who managed both men and supply lines. "Yes, Sergeant. Signs were misleading. Emily hesitated, realizing how small her words sounded against the storm's roar. "I'm on course now. Just lost the main route." Her hands shook slightly from cold and adrenaline. Monroe studied her, noting the snow-drenched hair, the frozen cheeks, the subtle tremor in her fingers. He nodded once sharply, understanding the stakes without needing further explanation. "Follow me," he said, gesturing toward a narrow track leading deeper into the woods. His confidence was contagious, steadying her nerves. Emily shifted the truck slowly, trusting Monroe's path, all the while feeling the relentless anxiety of straying so far from known territory. Her mind calculated every minute lost meant tanks frozen in place, men waiting in vain. Every wrong turn could be fatal. The snow began to thin slightly, the wind easing to a biting whisper rather, then a whip. Trees parted, revealing hints of sunlight refracted off ice-covered branches. Emily allowed herself a fleeting thought of gratitude, then suppressed it. Survival demanded focus. She checked the fuel, the engine, her tires. Everything was functioning, but the Ardennes remained a living, unpredictable obstacle. They passed another abandoned vehicle, a French civilian car riddled with bullets, doors open, snow collecting inside. Emily's stomach twisted. The forest was littered with evidence of desperation, of lives halted abruptly by war's indiscriminate hand. She swallowed hard, pushing the images aside. She had to keep moving. Panic or pity would not refuel the tanks, would not get the soldiers their lifeline. Half an hour later, they reached a partially cleared ridge. Monroe signaled her to stop. "We'll get you back en route from here. The main checkpoint is 3 miles north, though roads are treacherous." Emily nodded, gratitude mixing with fatigue. She could see the path, jagged and twisting, but navigable if approached cautiously. She checked the truck, tightened her scarf, and inhaled the bitter cold. Every breath reminded her that she was alive, that the mission was not yet over. As Emily started the engine again, Monroe called after her. "Watch for patrols. Arden doesn't forgive mistakes." She offered a tight smile, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in his words. She rolled forward, careful, precise, navigating the labyrinth of snow-covered roads. Her thoughts flickered to Thomas once more, to the soldiers waiting, to the Sherman units that depended on her. Fear and fatigue were present, but determination had rooted deeper. The forest thickened again, the road narrowing under the encroaching trees, shadows elongating in the diffused light. Emily pressed on, her mind attuned to the smallest changes in terrain, to the faintest crunch of snow that might signal another vehicle or a trap. She had gone wrong, yes, but she was correcting the course. 1 mile at a time, one careful decision at a time. She felt the weight of responsibility, the gnawing fear of failure, but beneath it, a stubborn flame. She would deliver this fuel. She had to. By nightfall, Emily had navigated through the most treacherous section of the Ardennes, the storm easing but the forest still looming ominously. She allowed herself one moment to exhale fully, recognizing her own resilience. She had been lost, but she had found her way, relying on skill, instinct, and the quiet guidance of allies. The journey was far from over, but the first step back onto the right path had been taken. Emily Harper, frostbitten and weary, continued forward, carrying hope through a forest that had swallowed so many before her. The snow had softened into a cold mist, a gray-white haze that blurred the edges of the Ardennes forest. Every tree looked the same, every drift a potential trap. Emily Harper hunched over the steering wheel of her supply truck, breath misting inside the cab. The wind howled in the treetops, but the quiet below was more unsettling. It was the kind of silence that made the slightest noise feel like a gunshot, the slightest flicker of light a flare of danger. She had driven for hours without seeing another living soul, yet now, far ahead, a faint glow pulsed between the trunks. A subtle glint, almost like lantern light, reflected off ice-encrusted branches. Then came the sound, low, deliberate, metal scraping, something moving through the snow. Emily froze, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. It could be friendly troops, or it could be German patrols, scouting, hunting, lying in wait. Her pulse thumped in her ears, each beat matching the snow crunching under the truck's tires. Emily was 32, tall and slender, with ash-blonde hair plastered to her forehead and pale skin flushed pink from the biting cold. Her blue-gray eyes scanned every shadow, every subtle movement in the falling snow. She had always been precise, methodical, the kind of person who noticed the smallest inconsistencies in machinery or maps, traits that had made her invaluable in the Motor Transport Corps. But now, in the Ardennes, those skills were being tested in ways she had never imagined. Every decision could mean life or death, not just for her, but for the men counting on the fuel in her truck. Her first impulse was to accelerate, to push past the unknown, but caution won out. She killed the headlights, leaving the truck to move like a ghost along the icy road. The engine hummed faintly, and she shifted into low gear, feeling the tires bite into the frozen earth. Emily's mind raced, reviewing every survival tactic she had learned, every story from veterans she had worked alongside. Observation first, patience second. Every detail mattered, and yet the Ardennes seemed intent on erasing them all. The glow ahead persisted, flickering like a candle in the mist. Emily's eyes narrowed. She tried to make out shapes, the outline of a tent, a fire, or perhaps the glint of helmets. Each possibility carried its own risk. She knew German soldiers often disguised themselves, dressed as Americans, setting false markers to lure supply trucks into ambushes. She couldn't tell if she was being cautious or paralyzed by fear. Either way, she couldn't afford a mistake. She moved slowly, inch by inch, heart thudding, senses stretched to the limit. Suddenly, another vehicle appeared, half buried in a snowdrift. It was a jeep, windows shattered, hood twisted, as if it had been abandoned in haste. Emily's stomach tightened. There were no bodies, no soldiers, only the eerie reminder of what could happen if she made a wrong move. She scanned the surrounding woods for movement, hearing only the occasional snap of a branch under the weight of snow. The forest felt alive, watching her, judging her. Her breath came faster, fogging the cab. She had to push it down, force her mind back to the mission, the fuel, the tanks, the men waiting. Failure was not an option. From the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, she thought it was another abandoned vehicle's driver, but then he stepped into a faint beam of moonlight, revealing a young soldier, barely older than Emily herself. Private Robert Bobby Fields, 21, broad-shouldered with short sandy hair and freckled skin, carried a rifle awkwardly, his hands raw from the cold. His eyes, wide and alert, reflected both fear and determination. Emily recognized him instantly. He was part of a rear guard unit stationed near the crossroads she had passed hours ago. "Hold it!" he called, his voice trembling slightly despite the authority he tried to project. Emily froze, debating whether to respond. Slowly, she raised her hands just enough to show she was unarmed and trustworthy. "Emily Harper, Motor Transport Corps," she said clearly, her voice steady even as her pulse raced. "I'm delivering fuel to the armored units near Stavelo. I got off route." Bobby's gaze softened slightly as he processed the information. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered by caution. "You're lucky," he muttered, gesturing her to keep moving. "We've had patrols spotted just south of here. Germans, likely scouting." His tone was terse, practiced, the voice of someone who had survived Ardennes by staying sharp, wary of every shadow. Emily exhaled slowly, tension easing but not gone. She checked the truck, ensuring every connection and gear was functioning, then nodded toward Bobby. "I'll keep it quiet," she promised. He returned a short nod, his attention scanning the trees, rifle ready. Emily watched him disappear back into the snow, a reminder of both the dangers around her and the solidarity of those navigating them alongside her. As the road narrowed again, Emily's thoughts turned inward. Each mile of this blizzard-stricken forest demanded her full attention, her instincts honed to an almost unbearable degree. She felt every bump, every subtle variation in snow texture, every potential obstruction. Her mind replayed scenarios, German patrols, mines, even hidden explosives left by previous engagements. She had learned to trust her intuition, yet the Ardennes had a way of eroding certainty. For a fleeting moment, doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if she miscalculated? What if she stumbled into an ambush? But the thought of the men depending on her silenced the fear. The truck rolled past another sign of destruction. A burned-out German half-track, its tracks twisted and frozen mid-turn. Emily paused briefly, taking in the scene, then pressed on. The forest thickened, the road barely wide enough for her truck, branches scraping against the canvas. The faint glow of light appeared again, teasing her senses. Emily's pulse quickened. Could it be friendly forces this time, or another trap? She killed the engine, letting the vehicle coast silently into a shadowed hollow. She stepped out, boots crunching in snow, eyes straining through the mist. The glow shifted, confirming movement. Her heart pounded. A sudden noise, a snapping twig, made her freeze again. She pressed herself against the cab, listening. Silence, then the sound of distant engines, muffled but growing. Emily's breath became shallow. Her mind cataloged every possibility. Was it German tanks advancing, or just distant Allied convoys, also lost in the storm? She gripped the wheel tighter, returning to the cab, engine whispering as she inched forward. Every shadow, every glint of ice could conceal danger. The tension was suffocating, each decision magnified by the stakes of the mission. Time lost meaning as she wound through the trees, inching toward the unknown light. Emily's internal dialogue oscillated between calm calculation and raw fear. She reminded herself of past experiences. Each successful navigation through tight, snow-laden roads had built her confidence. Each misstep had taught humility. Ardennes was testing both. She focused on breathing, letting her mind scan continuously for irregularities, listening to the faintest sounds over the engine's hum. Finally, she came upon a narrow clearing where the snow thinned and the glow originated. Two figures moved around a makeshift campfire, cautiously watching the tree line. Emily held her breath, evaluating. The soldiers were Americans, identifiable by worn M1 helmets and patched uniforms, faces streaked with frost and soot. She exhaled silently, relief and tension coexisting. The threat had been silent, invisible, but real, and she had navigated it without incident. The camp was small, temporary, a lifeline in the vast Ardennes wilderness. Emily pressed on, lights off, engine low, aware that she had survived another gauntlet. Silent threats remained around every bend, every frozen curve, but her instincts had carried her past this particular peril. The forest seemed to recede slightly, giving her a moment of clarity. She allowed herself a brief glance at the fuel gauge, full and secure. Her mind acknowledged a small victory. She had kept the mission alive, kept the supply moving, even in the face of unseen danger. The Ardennes would not release her yet, the storm not fully spent. But Emily Harper's resolve had deepened. She had faced the silent threats, the unseen eyes, the ghosts of abandoned vehicles, and the echoes of gunfire. She would continue, inch by inch, knowing that every careful decision, every heartbeat, was a step closer to saving lives waiting for her fuel. The forest remained oppressive, but the path was hers to claim. And Emily, exhausted yet unbroken, pressed on, determined to deliver hope to those relying on her courage. A pale gray morning hung over the Ardennes forest, the storm having softened into a misty drizzle that slicked the snow-laden road. Emily Harper's truck moved cautiously, tires crunching softly over ice-crusted ruts. The fog wrapped around the trees, turning the world into a monochrome maze where each shadow could hide danger. Her fingers, numb by cold yet steady, gripped the wheel. Her mind cycled between calculations, strategies, and the persistent awareness of her mission: deliver the high-octane fuel to the armored units before the supply lines collapsed. Emily's eyes flicked constantly from one feature of the landscape to another. At 32, tall and slender, with ash-blonde hair tucked under a wool cap and pale, freckled skin tinged pink from the cold, she had always relied on her acute observational skills to navigate tight roads and unpredictable terrain. The Ardennes demanded more than skill. It demanded endurance, patience, and intuition sharpened by fear. Every curve, every dip, every shadow could conceal abandoned vehicles, enemy patrols, or hidden hazards. Her chest tightened with each mile, the wind pressing against the cab like icy hands. The weight of her cargo, the thousands of gallons of gasoline, was a silent reminder of the lives depending on her. Through the mist, she saw it, a low silhouette against the pale horizon, wooden posts forming a crude barricade and the flicker of a fire. Her pulse quickened. It was a small American outpost, hidden among a copse of trees. Emily slowed the truck to a crawl, scanning for movement. Two figures emerged, carrying rifles, faces streaked with soot and frostbite. One was a sergeant, older and grizzled, his jaw square, eyes sharp, a permanent frown etched by years of battle. Sergeant Tom Harrington, 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a trim beard, commanded the small unit. His voice barked over the wind, authoritative yet laced with exhaustion. The other was Private Lewis Carter, 23, thin, with dark hair plastered to his head by the damp, pale skin almost blending into the mist, jittery but earnest, trying to maintain composure under pressure. "Hold it!" Harrington called, motioning them to stop. Emily complied, lowering her hands slightly as the men approached. She could feel the tension radiating off them. The Ardennes had not been kind to anyone who remained stationary for long. Sergeant Harrington's gaze swept over the truck, then to Emily herself. "Name and mission," he demanded, voice firm but not unkind. "Emily Harper, Motor Transport Corps," she said, keeping her tone calm. "Delivering fuel to the armored division near Stavilo. I was off route due to snow and blocked roads, but I've found you now." The mention of fuel caused Harrington's eyes to flicker with recognition, and relief softened the lines on his face. "About time," he muttered. "We've been stranded for hours. Tanks, idle, engines dead. You don't know what your timing means." Emily exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening slightly. She stepped out, boots crunching against the crusted snow. The cold bit into her legs, yet the warmth from the small fire of the outpost offered a temporary reprieve. She took in the scene, a few Sherman tanks, silent and cold, their crews huddled beside them in threadbare blankets, rifles at the ready, but engines dead. Snow had accumulated on the treads and barrels, leaving the machines frozen, immobile, a testament to the fragility of supply lines and timing in war. "Looks worse than I imagined," Emily murmured to herself, eyes scanning the deserted trees beyond the outpost. Harrington noticed and nodded grimly. "We've been holding this road to keep German forces from breaking through, but without fuel, we're dead weight," he said. "Every delay risks lives. Tanks can't move, artillery can't fire. Without gasoline, the Ardennes isn't just cold, it's lethal." Emily's chest tightened again, the gravity of her mission settling heavily over her. This was more than delivery. It was survival for dozens of soldiers, perhaps hundreds. She could feel the adrenaline mingling with her fear, sharpening her senses, guiding her instincts. The slightest error could mean catastrophe. She moved to the back of the truck, inspecting the fuel drums, checking the valves, ensuring everything was secure. The steel beneath her gloves was cold but reassuringly solid, the smell of gasoline sharp in the misty air. She realized, not for the first time, that this cargo was more powerful than any weapon here. It was life itself. Private Lewis Carter approached cautiously, shivering despite his thick coat. "Is it really fuel?" he asked, voice uncertain, eyes wide. Emily smiled faintly. "High octane," she confirmed, "enough to get those tanks moving again." Carter nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his exhausted gaze. Harrington clapped a gloved hand on Emily's shoulder, his rough fingers firm. "You're in time, just in time. Without this, we'd have had to abandon the road and retreat. Every mile you drove mattered. You're keeping us alive, Sergeant Carter, too." His eyes met hers for a moment, gratitude unspoken but palpable. Emily nodded, understanding the weight of her presence in that frozen, fragile outpost. As the men worked to connect pumps and siphon fuel into the tanks, Emily allowed herself a brief pause. She leaned against the cab, watching, listening. The frost stung her cheeks, and exhaustion clawed at her limbs, but there was a strange satisfaction in seeing her task finally intersect with its purpose. The quiet tension of the Ardennes had not yet lifted. The forest still whispered dangers, hidden eyes in the mist. Yet here, in this small clearing, she had created a ripple of resilience. Time moved differently in the cold Ardennes. Minutes bled into hours as tanks. It sputtered, engines coughing to life. The warmth of machinery replaced the fire's heat, a mechanical heartbeat reviving the outpost. Emily watched, her mind cataloging every movement, every spark of life returning to the frozen machines. Her fear, while still present, was tempered by effectiveness, the tangible result of her actions. The tanks moved, the soldiers' eyes brightened, and the once silent outpost hummed with survival. She took a step back, considering the psychological weight of her mission. For hours, she had driven alone through unseen threats, navigating by instinct and training. She had faced isolation, the constant fear of ambush, the suffocating silence of a snowbound forest, and now she was witnessing the concrete results of perseverance. Each connection of fuel line, each engine turning over, was a testament to human determination and the critical role she played. Emily realized, in a quiet but profound way, that sometimes survival itself required courage, not heroics, just steadfast commitment to one's duty. Sergeant Harrington addressed her as the last hose was disconnected. "You don't just deliver fuel, Emily," he said, voice low, serious. "You deliver life. This fuel is more than gasoline. It's everything keeping us here until reinforcements arrive." Emily nodded, her face pale and streaked with sweat and snow, the reality of her responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She felt pride, yes, but also the weight of knowing that she could not afford any missteps on the remaining miles of her journey. As she climbed back into the truck, she cast one last glance at the outpost. The men waved faintly, engines rumbling, lights flickering, a temporary bastion of resistance in the vast frozen expanse. Emily tightened her scarf around her neck, adjusted her gloves, and started the engine. The truck vibrated under her, alive and purposeful. She had delivered not just fuel, but hope, a tangible reminder that even in the frozen, chaotic Ardennes, small victories could sustain life. Turning back onto the snow-covered road, she allowed herself a deep, steady breath. Each mile was still fraught with danger. Each shadow could conceal an enemy. Each curve could hide the unknown. Yet she moved forward, confident in her navigation, determined to complete the mission. The hidden outpost had given her direction, confirmation of her purpose, and the reassurance that her efforts were not in vain. Survival in Ardennes depended on precision, courage, and the ability to push forward when the forest seemed intent on swallowing all signs of life. Emily Harper, motor transport driver, felt the subtle shift in the air, the mist thinning slightly, the first hints of sunlight struggling through the gray clouds. The forest remained formidable, but for the moment she had won a small victory. She would continue, every decision deliberate, every heartbeat a measure of both fear and resolve. In the silence that followed, the Ardennes itself seemed to acknowledge her determination, the faint crunch of tires against icy ruts marking the rhythm of persistence, the sound of life moving forward in a land frozen yet full of potential. The fog had lifted slightly by midday, though the snow still lay thick on the Ardennes roads, icy crusts hiding treacherous dips. Emily Harper drove cautiously, the engine's rumble echoing through the empty forest. Her breath misted against the windshield, each exhale a reminder of the cold and the stakes. Every mile brought her closer to the armored unit, yet the isolation pressed heavily on her shoulders. She felt the weight of every life depending on her fuel shipment, every soldier frozen in the Ardennes' grip, waiting for movement that only she could deliver. The terrain opened to a small clearing, and Emily recognized the unmistakable silhouettes of Sherman tanks, dormant in the snow, turrets idle, tracks stiff with ice. Soldiers moved around the vehicles, some huddled in blankets, their hands red and raw from frostbite. Their eyes lifted briefly as her truck approached, hope flickering when they saw her unmistakable load. Among them, Captain Henry Matthews, 38, stood tall with a lean but muscular frame, broad shoulders, and a chiseled jawline lined with a permanent scowl softened by sharp, intelligent eyes. He carried an aura of command, tempered by the exhaustion of hours spent trying to keep a frozen front line alive. Emily eased the truck to a halt. The snow crunched under her boots as she climbed down, tightening her woolen scarf against the persistent chill. Her pale cheeks and freckled nose tinged pink from the cold, hair damp under her cap. She surveyed the men and tanks, feeling the enormity of her task settle into her bones. "Driver!" Matthews called, striding toward her, coat flapping in the wind. "Is that the fuel?" Emily nodded, hands gripping the edges of the truck. "High octane, enough to get all of your Shermans moving again." A murmur rippled through the soldiers. Lieutenant Claire Benson, 29, petite but resolute, with short auburn hair tucked behind her ears and pale green eyes bright despite exhaustion, stepped forward. She had a determined expression, shoulders squared, a calming presence among the nervous men. "Finally," she said, voice steady. "We've been out here, engine silent, waiting. Thank God you made it." Emily exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and adrenaline flooding her. "Let's get this moving," she said, moving toward the rear of the truck where the hoses and pumps awaited connection. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, worked with practiced efficiency, checking valves, aligning hoses, and ensuring the flow would be smooth. The smell of gasoline mingled with smoke from small fires the soldiers had kept alive for warmth, a harsh, sharp reminder of both the danger and necessity of the moment. As the first hose connected, Matthews stood close, overseeing the operation. "This is critical," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "If we get these engines running, we can break the stalemate. We can push back before the Germans regroup." Emily nodded, her gaze scanning the surrounding tree line. The Ardennes was still quiet, deceptively calm. Each movement was a potential risk, each shadow a possible ambush. She could feel the tension in her shoulders tighten as she worked, heart beating rapidly. Private Samuel Sam Willis, 19, a small, wiry boy with dark hair curling around his ears, skin pale from cold, and wide, anxious brown eyes, helped connect the hoses, hands shaking from both frostbite and nerves. "I've never seen fuel delivery like this under fire," he muttered. Emily gave a faint smile. "Most don't," she said. "It's not glamorous, it's survival." Sam nodded, swallowing hard, inspired by her steady presence. The first Sherman groaned as fuel reached its tanks, coughing and rattling as the engine attempted to ignite. Emily stepped back, the cold biting harder now that she was less active, watching the machine come alive. Smoke belched from the exhaust, a mechanical roar replacing the silence that had held the forest for hours. Matthew's eyes gleamed with relief. "Keep going," he barked. "Every tank counts." Emily moved from vehicle to vehicle, assisting with connections, monitoring pressure, and offering instructions. The soldiers, once frozen in despair, began moving with renewed energy, guided by her efficiency and calm demeanor. She felt the weight of responsibility shift from a burden to a purpose. The frozen forest now witnessed a fragile rhythm of life returning, a pulse fueled by gasoline and determination. Lieutenant Benson coordinated movements, her clear, commanding voice cutting through the murmur of engines. "Matthews, we need to line up the platoon along the road edge. Emily, stay with the last tanks, ensure the fuel feed remains steady." Emily nodded, adjusting hoses, watching the last of the Shermans slowly roar to life. Each engine was a heartbeat restored, a chance for these men to survive the Ardennes' frozen grip and the German advance. A sudden snap of a branch made Emily freeze. Her eyes darted toward the tree line. For a moment, fear pricked sharply at her consciousness. The forest still held threats she could not predict, but Matthew's steady voice reassured her. "All clear, Emily. Focus." Her hands returned to work, but her mind registered every sound, every movement, every subtle shift in the mist. The responsibility was immense, but she felt capable, precise, prepared. By mid-afternoon, all the Shermans had started, their engines shaking the frozen ground, tracks leaving deep impressions in the snow. The soldiers' faces, previously etched with fatigue and despair, now glimmered with hope and energy. Sam Willis grinned, almost incredulous. "We're alive," he said, voice trembling. Emily smiled faintly, feeling a quiet satisfaction bloom within her chest. She had done what she was sent to do, deliver the fuel that would allow these men to move, fight, and survive. "Captain..." Matthews approached her, nodding once, a rare smile cracking his stoic expression. "You've done more than deliver fuel, Harper. You've delivered hope. Without you, we'd have been sitting ducks in the Ardennes for who knows how long. You've changed this battle." Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "I just did my job," she murmured, though she could not hide the faint pride in her voice. Lieutenant Benson added, her auburn hair damp against her scarf. "It's more than a job. You came through when we needed it most. This fuel isn't just gasoline, it's our lifeline." Emily allowed herself a moment to take it in, feeling the weight of both exhaustion and accomplishment. She had driven through snow, darkness, and uncertainty. Yet here she was, standing amidst moving machines, soldiers ready, the forest no longer silent. Outside the clearing, the mist continued to shift, the Ardennes' quiet deception lingering, but Emily Harper felt a subtle victory pulse through the scene. The tanks would move, artillery could be supplied, and the soldiers' morale lifted. Each connection of fuel, each roaring engine, was tangible proof that perseverance mattered, that even in isolation and danger, her choices had consequences far beyond herself. As the last tank revved, Emily stepped back, surveying the scene. Smoke, ice, and steel mingled into a strange symphony of survival. She allowed herself a brief pause, chest heaving, fingers stiff but steady. This was what she had driven for, what she had endured. The Ardennes could not strip her purpose away. Each engine's roar was a testament to determination, precision, and resolve. With the mission momentarily stabilized, Matthews gathered his men. "Formation on the left flank, moving toward the next checkpoint," he ordered. Emily watched, heart pounding, as the Shermans rolled forward, cutting through snow and ice, a moving shield of hope. She had witnessed lives being preserved by something as simple, yet critical as fuel and timing. Emily climbed back into her truck, wiping her gloves on her coat. Her face was red from exertion and frost, hair damp, eyes bright but reflective. She turned the key, engine humming steadily, and prepared to leave the outpost. Every mile still held risk, but the immediate threat had been mitigated. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. Looking back at the outpost, she saw the soldiers now moving with confidence, engines alive, and a line of tanks stretching behind them. The forest still held hidden threats, but for the moment, the Ardennes had yielded to human determination. Emily Harper, motor transport driver, had delivered not just fuel, but hope, a tangible reminder that courage and persistence mattered, even in the face of isolation, danger, and uncertainty. A bitter wind swept across the Ardennes forest that morning, carrying flakes of snow that stung exposed skin and turned the world into a blurred canvas of white and gray. Emily Harper sat in the cab of her truck, watching as the revived Shermans began rolling forward, their engines a low growl that cut through the cold silence. She could feel every thrum of their tracks beneath her, as if the machines themselves were aware of the life pulsing through their fuel lines, the blood and hope of men depending on them. Captain Henry Matthews strode beside the lead tank, his broad shoulders squared against the wind. His face was pale but resolute, the jawline hardened by days of command under relentless pressure. "Harper," he called, voice firm yet tinged with awe, "we're moving to engage. The Germans aren't expecting this. Your fuel delivery bought us every advantage we needed." Emily nodded, fingers gripping the edge of the truck door, feeling the weight of her decision pressing against her chest. It was surreal. She had never imagined that a simple delivery could shape the course of a battle. Private Samuel Willis clambered into the back of a Sherman, his small frame dwarfed by the armored giant. His eyes were wide with a mixture of excitement and fear, dark hair plastered against his forehead by melting snow. This is incredible," he muttered. Emily offered him a brief smile, but her mind was elsewhere, scanning the tree line, calculating every possible angle, every potential ambush. The Ardennes had a way of turning hope into despair in a heartbeat, and she refused to underestimate it. Lieutenant Claire Benson guided the platoon, her auburn hair whipping in the wind, eyes sharp as she gestured to each tank and its crew. "Hold formation, keep the line steady, watch the flanks," she commanded, a calm anchor amid chaos. Her petite frame belied the strength in her voice, and Emily felt a surge of admiration for the way Benson's precision orchestrated motion from the stillness of desperation. As the tanks rolled forward, the first signs of the German advance emerged. Smoke rose in thin plumes along the distant ridges, the rumble of engines muffled but unmistakable. A line of Panzerbeifels and half-tracks crept over frozen ground, their tracks cutting shallow furrows into snow that had already borne witness to death and retreat. Emily felt her pulse quicken, mind flicking through the countless what-ifs of her journey, the wrong turn, the hidden roads, the abandoned vehicles. Every choice she had made culminated in this moment, and the weight of it almost made her shiver, not from cold, but from responsibility. The first shot rang out, a distant crack that echoed across the forest, followed by the thrum of returning fire. Matthews shouted orders, directing the Shermans to form a flanking pattern that would intercept the German advance. Emily's gaze followed each movement, her chest tightening as the engines pushed the tanks faster, the roar of their return fire, a visceral chorus of metal and human determination. She felt an odd detachment, as if observing a carefully choreographed dance she had unwittingly helped orchestrate. A new figure emerged from the snowy tree line, a German lieutenant, Franz Keller, 34, tall and lean, with angular features softened by dark, piercing eyes, and a scar running from temple to jaw. His face, usually expressionless under discipline, twisted in frustration as he surveyed the unexpected American mobility. Keller had been pushing his men hard, hoping to exploit the temporary paralysis of the Allied forces. His stubbornness and pride, honed over years of training and battlefield victories, now collided with an unforeseen variable, Emily's fuel delivery. The realization caused his jaw to clench, eyes narrowing as he barked commands in rapid German. Emily watched through the cab window, heart pounding, every instinct screaming for caution. She could see the German panzers attempting to regroup, but their movements were sluggish, fuel-starved, and uncoordinated. Her chest swelled with a complex mixture of fear, awe, and quiet satisfaction. Without realizing it, she had become a pivotal factor in the battle. Each tank that moved, each line of fire that opened, carried a silent acknowledgement of her perseverance through snow and isolation. Private Willis leaned forward, almost losing his balance as the Sherman lurched over uneven ground. "They're falling back!" he exclaimed, voice trembling. Emily exhaled, relief and disbelief coursing through her. The German line was indeed retreating, abandoning vehicles and supplies as they faltered under the renewed American push. Her mind traced back to the lonely roads she had navigated, the wrong turn into unknown danger, and she felt the full weight of her journey. Every mile of snow and every hour of tension had contributed to this moment of turning the tide. Lieutenant Benson called over the radio, directing tank crews with the precision of a conductor. Emily helped guide the last of the fuel connections, ensuring every Sherman remained operational. Her fingers were numb, movement slow but accurate, heart synchronized with the rhythmic thrum of engines. She felt almost invisible amid the chaos, yet every decision, every action held consequences larger than she could fully comprehend. The German retreat accelerated, chaos spreading through their ranks. Tanks were abandoned in drifts of snow, their crews fleeing on foot, weapons abandoned. Captain Matthews observed the scene, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. "Harper, without you, we wouldn't have done this," he said, voice low, carrying both awe and respect. Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "I just did my part," she murmured, though she could not deny the pride swelling in her chest. Suddenly, the crackle of a distant radio message caught her attention. "Allied armor advancing. German. Units immobilized. Reposition fuel as needed." Emily felt the enormity of the news sink in. Her delivery, a simple act of navigation and persistence, had directly influenced the course of the engagement. She had altered the flow of history, yet no one outside the forest would know her name. She was a faceless agent in a larger narrative, yet the lives saved and the momentum gained were indisputable. The Ardennes forest seemed to hold its breath as the snow continued to fall. Emily allowed herself a moment to stand outside the cab, feeling the cold bite through her gloves and coat, mind spinning with the realization of her impact. Around her, the men she had indirectly empowered moved with renewed determination, engines roaring, guns firing, a living testament to the quiet but decisive action of one woman. As the American line solidified, the chaos of the German retreat became more evident. Lieutenant Keller's men were in disarray, unable to regroup effectively, forced into a patchwork retreat that would leave them vulnerable for days. Emily's gaze swept across the snow-blanketed battlefield, noticing abandoned half-tracks, burning wrecks, and the scattered forms of fleeing soldiers. Each symbolized not just enemy failure, but a small measure of the life she had helped preserve. Captain Matthews approached her, face flushed from exertion, eyes bright despite fatigue. "You may not be in any official reports, Harper, but you've changed the outcome here. We're holding because of your actions." Emily swallowed, the cold making her throat tight. "I just kept going," she admitted, voice almost a whisper, yet firm in its truth. She had no medals, no public acknowledgement, but she carried the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference when it mattered most. As afternoon melted into evening, Emily prepared to leave the outpost, watching the tanks advance with coordinated efficiency. Lieutenant Benson gave a final nod, a silent acknowledgement of her contribution. Samuel Willis waved from a Sherman hatch, eyes wide with admiration, shouting, "Thank you!" Emily gave a faint wave in return, heart swelling with the quiet pride that came from knowing she had delivered not just fuel, but life and hope. The Ardennes forest remained silent around her as she climbed into the truck, engine humming steadily. Snow fell more gently now, the world seemingly holding a fragile peace in the wake of chaos. Emily Harper, motor transport driver, had become an unseen architect of victory, her perseverance and courage quietly altering the course of the battle. She drove forward into the fading light, carrying with her the knowledge that even in anonymity, determination could shape history. Snow still lingered in pockets along the Pennsylvania hills, stubborn remnants of a winter long past. Emily Harper walked along the edge of the quiet town of Harrisburg, her breath visible in the cold morning air, a light scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. The streets were familiar, unthreatening, and yet she could not shake the memories of Ardennes, of blinding snow, the whine of engines, the tense silence of roads where danger could strike without warning. Emily's hands, now free of gloves, traced the worn leather of her coat as she approached her small home. The door creaked as she entered, carrying a simple duffel bag with her. Inside, photographs of her family were carefully arranged on a wooden mantel. Her husband, Thomas, a gentleman with a square jaw and warm brown eyes, his presence steady and grounding. Their two sons, Michael and Andrew, both tall and gangly, smiles bright, a living reminder of the ordinary life she had fought to return to. For a moment, she paused, letting the warmth of the house seep into her frozen bones. The world outside had returned to normal. No explosions, no patrols, no enemy soldiers looming from the woods. Yet, inside her, the echoes of that winter lingered. Emily had carried something more than fuel through snow and danger. She had carried the hopes and lives of countless men, their survival resting on her judgment, her courage, and her refusal to turn back. Her mind wandered back to the Ardennes forest, to the small American outpost where she had first seen the tanks roar to life. Captain Henry Matthews, tall and commanding even in the chaos of battle, had given her a brief nod of gratitude, a gesture she had not thought twice about then. Lieutenant Claire Benson, with her sharp auburn hair and meticulous attention to detail, had organized the armored crews with the precision of a conductor, a calm presence that had kept men alive. And Samuel Willis, the young private whose wide eyes had mirrored her own fear and exhilaration, had survived because of a chain of events she had set in motion. In the quiet of her home, Emily allowed herself to acknowledge the strange duality of heroism. She had never fired a weapon. She had never shouted orders, and yet every action she had taken had resonated far beyond the snowy roads she had navigated. The thought made her chest tighten, not with pride exactly, but with the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that sometimes the right choice was not the easiest or the most visible. Emily's husband, Thomas, entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling into the cold air. He was a man shaped by hard work and patience, his hands calloused from years of carpentry. His calm, unwavering presence had been her anchor through sleepless nights of preparation before deployment and countless restless evenings of reflection afterward. "Coffee," he said softly, offering her the mug. His eyes searched hers, as if sensing the memories she could not fully speak aloud. She accepted it, wrapping her hands around the warmth, and allowed herself a quiet smile. "Thanks," she murmured. "It's good to be home." Thomas nodded, understanding more in that single word than any conversation could convey. Emily's thoughts shifted to the other quiet heroes of Ardennes, nurses who had moved through snow-covered villages tending to the wounded, their nimble fingers and calm voices preserving life with every step. Mechanics who had crawled beneath tanks with frozen hands, ensuring the engines would turn when it mattered most. Cooks who had warmed rations over fractured stoves, giving soldiers the energy to hold their lines. Every single person whose name would not appear in history books had contributed to survival, to victory. Emily had been one of them, a faceless participant in a colossal struggle, yet integral to its outcome. Her gaze drifted to a small photograph of her first winter assignment, a blurred snapshot of her truck cutting through the Ardennes forest. The canvas of white seemed almost peaceful in that image, yet she remembered the tension, the frozen dread, the moments when a wrong turn could have ended everything. Her heart had raced through every mile, every shadow, every ambiguous sign along the snow-covered roads. And yet, she had pressed on, drawn forward by a stubborn conviction that the mission mattered, that someone was waiting for her delivery. Emily's youngest son, Andrew, appeared at the doorway, hair a tousled mess, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom," he said, "what was it like over there?" She hesitated, knowing no answer could truly capture the intensity of those days. But she knelt to his height, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "It was cold," she said simply, "but it was important. Sometimes doing what's right isn't about medals or praise. It's about showing up when it matters." He considered her words, nodding slowly. Michael, her older son, leaned against the doorframe, taller now than she had expected, eyes thoughtful. "So you were like a hero?" he asked. Emily laughed quietly, a soft, tired sound. "Maybe, but not the kind you see in books, the kind that just keeps going, even when nobody's watching." Even as she spoke, Emily felt the shadows of Arden within her. How isolation could sharpen instinct, how fear could coexist with clarity, how small acts of persistence could ripple into outcomes far larger than anyone imagined. The quiet heroism she had practiced there had not ended with the war. It had simply transformed into the rhythm of daily life, paying bills on time, helping neighbors dig out their cars after snowstorms, teaching her sons to persevere when the path was unclear. Thomas watched her for a long moment, then reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "You made a difference, Emily. Whether anyone knows it or not, you did." She nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of truth, feeling the warmth of domestic life seep through the armor of memory. Evenings were spent around the fireplace, letters from old comrades tucked in drawers, each one a reminder of men and women who had endured Ardennes' cold and chaos. Emily would read the letters silently, tracing the stories of lives that had intersected with hers for only a brief, intense moment. Private Willis had returned home, writing about the life he had because of that single truckload of fuel. Lieutenant Benson had gone on to lead a small engineering corps. Captain Matthews returned to teaching strategy to new recruits, and countless others had faded back into anonymity. Each story reinforced the principle Emily had come to understand. Heroism was not always public, and bravery was not always visible. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted into muddy streams along the Pennsylvania hills, revealing green shoots struggling to reach the sun. Emily walked along the fields near her home, her sons racing ahead, laughing. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. She allowed herself a moment to remember Arden, not the chaos or fear, but the clarity that had come from commitment and the unshakable drive to see a task through, no matter the obstacles. In the quiet of her home and the rhythm of her ordinary life, Emily Harper understood that she would never need medals or recognition to define her actions. The stories of those who fought beside her, those who had persevered quietly, were enough. And in that understanding, she found peace. A peace earned through steadfast courage, perseverance, and unwavering dedication, far from cameras, parades, or history books. At night, as she tucked her sons into bed, Emily allowed herself a small smile. The war had ended years ago, but the lessons endured. Heroism was not only measured in combat or strategy. It was measured in presence, persistence, and the quiet refusal to give up. She had driven through snow and danger, had faced uncertainty and fear, and had delivered hope to those who could not reach it themselves. That was enough. As she settled into bed beside Thomas, Emily closed her eyes, allowing exhaustion and relief to wash over her. Arden, the forest, the snow, and the tanks felt distant yet indelibly present in her mind. She had done her part, without fanfare, without expectation, and in doing so, she had contributed to the survival of countless lives. And that, Emily knew, was the essence of the quiet hero. One who acts when it matters most, who continues when the road seems impossible, and who accepts that sometimes the greatest victories are invisible to the world. The legacy of Arden would live on, not only in history books, but in the lives she had touched, the tanks she had helped move, and the soldiers who had survived because one woman refused to stop driving, refused to quit, and refused to turn back.